Before we dive into this, if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you love, smash that like button and subscribe, because you are not going to believe the story I have for you. It's a story about how the deepest love can be twisted into the ugliest hate, and how the quietest man in the room can sometimes make the most noise when it truly matters. Stick around to the end, because the lesson I learned is one you won't want to miss. You are not welcome here. Get out. The words, sharp as shattered glass, echoed through the cavernous silence of the church. They didn't come from a stranger or a rival. They came from my daughter, Lily, who stood at the altar, a vision in white lace and simmering rage. Her face, the same face I had cradled in my hands as a baby, the same face I had wiped tears from after scraped knees and broken hearts, was contorted into a mask of pure contempt. Her new husband, Mark, stood beside her, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist, a faint, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. Every eye in that ornate sanctuary, hundreds of them, swiveled from her to me. I stood in the aisle frozen, my carefully chosen suit suddenly feeling like a clown's costume. The small, wrapped gift in my hand, a silver locket with a picture of her mother inside, felt as heavy as a block of lead. My heart, which had been swelling with a father's pride just moments before, now felt like it had been ripped from my chest and stomped on the cold marble floor. I had raised her alone, loved her with the fire of 1,000 suns, and in the most important moment of her life, she had cast me out like a piece of trash. As I turned and made the long, humiliating walk back down that aisle, the heavy oak doors closing behind me with a funereal thud, I didn't just feel grief. A cold, hard ember of determination began to glow in the pit of my stomach. I didn't know how or why this had happened, but I made a silent vow right there, on the steps of that church. I would find out the truth, and I would not just reclaim my daughter. I would utterly dismantle the lies that had stolen her from me. The silence in my small house was a physical weight, pressed down on me, suffocating me with memories. Every corner held a ghost of Lily. There she was, a giggling toddler with pigtails, leaving a trail of cookie crumbs across the living room floor. There she was, a gangly preteen, practicing her violin with a look of fierce concentration, the screeching notes a symphony to my ears. There she was, a radiant high school graduate, her cap askew, hugging me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. Her mother, my beloved Sarah, had been gone for 20 years, taken by an illness that was as swift as it was cruel. She had left me with two things: a hole in my heart and our beautiful 3-year-old daughter. From that day forward, Lily became my entire world. I learned to braid hair, clumsily at first, my big fingers fumbling with the fine strands. I learned to pack school lunches, attended every parent-teacher conference, and sat through countless dance recitals, my chest puffed with pride. I worked a steady, if unspectacular, job as an accountant for a mid-sized firm, a job I kept not for ambition, but for the stability it offered. It meant I could be home every night for dinner, that I could help with homework, that I could be there to read her a bedtime story. We weren't rich, but we had enough. More importantly, we had each other. Sarah had left behind a trust, a considerable sum from her family that she'd wanted to ensure Lily's future. It was my duty, as the executor, to manage it responsibly until Lily turned 30. It was never my money. It was always for her. I explained this to her when she was old enough to understand, showing her the statements, teaching her about investments, about the responsibility that came with such a gift. I wanted her to be prepared, not spoiled. "This is a safety net, sweetie," I told her. "Not a hammock. It's to help you build a life, not to avoid living 1 inch," and she had understood. Or so I thought. She was a good kid, kind and compassionate, with her mother's artistic spirit and my practical mind. We were a team. When she got her acceptance letter to her dream university, we danced around the kitchen like fools. I took on extra freelance accounting work on nights and weekends to make sure she could graduate debt-free, to preserve the trust for a real start in life, a house perhaps, or a business. I never told her about the extra hours, the bleary-eyed mornings. It was a father's joy, a silent sacrifice made out of love. I saw it as my fundamental purpose. Then, during her senior year of college, Mark entered the picture. He was handsome, I suppose, in that slick, overconfident way some people find charming. He came from what he described as old money, and he carried himself with an air of effortless superiority. First, I was happy for Lily. She seemed smitten, her eyes sparkling whenever she talked about him. But as time went on, a tiny, persistent alarm bell started ringing in the back of my mind. It started with small things. He would make little jokes at my expense, always with a smile, so they seemed harmless. He called my cherished 15-year-old sedan a relic. He referred to my quiet suburban neighborhood as the province's Lily would laugh, a little nervously, and I would force a smile, not wanting to be the overprotective, disapproving father. But the jokes slowly morphed into dismissive comments. When I mentioned my careful management of Lily's trust, Mark would wave a hand and say, "Oh, George, you don't need to worry about all that boring stuff. I have people who can handle that. We can make that money really work for us." The us struck me. It was happening so fast. Then came his mother, Eleanor. She was a tall, severe woman who looked at my modest home as if it were a particularly interesting insect she was about to squash. She spoke in a clipped, condescending tone, and her compliments were always backhanded. "It's just so quaint what you've done with this little place, George," she'd said during their first visit for dinner. "You must be so proud of Lily for managing to rise above." Well, I knew. She was a master of the unspoken insult. I watched as they slowly began to isolate Lily. Our weekly Sunday dinners became monthly, then sporadic. Phone calls I used to get every day became short, infrequent texts. When I did see her, Lily seemed different. There was a new hardness in her eyes, a defensive edge to her voice. She started parroting Mark and Eleanor's opinions. She began asking more pointed questions about the trust. "Mark says you're being far too conservative with the investments, Dad. He says we could be doubling the returns." I tried to explain my strategy, the one I had discussed with her many times before: long-term, stable growth over high-risk gambles. "Lily, this is your future. It's your mother's legacy. My job is to protect it, not to play roulette with it." She looked at me, but her eyes were distant, as if she were seeing me through a script written by someone else. "Or maybe you just don't know what you're doing," she'd said, the words a casual sting. "Mark's family has been managing serious wealth for generations. Maybe you should listen to him." That was the first time she'd ever truly hurt me. It felt like a betrayal of everything we had been. I was no longer her trusted father. I was an obstacle, an incompetent old man standing in the way of her brilliant, wealthy fiancé. The engagement was a whirlwind. They announced it at a lavish party at Eleanor's country club, a place where I felt as welcome as a stray dog. They had set the date for only 6 months later. I tried to talk to Lily, to plead for them to slow down, to get to know each other better. "What's the rush, sweetie?" I asked her one afternoon. We were in her new, sleek apartment, an apartment I knew she couldn't afford on her starting salary. "We're in love, Dad," she said, her tone impatient, as if I were a child. "When you know. Why wait? Mark wants to give me the world, and I want to let him." She then dropped the bomb. "Mark and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if you transferred management of the trust over to his family's financial advisor. It's a conflict of interest for you to be in control of it now that I'm getting married." The coldness of her delivery was shocking. A conflict of interest? I was her father. My only interest was her well-being. "Absolutely not, Lily," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "The terms of your mother's will are clear. I am the executor until you are 30. It is my duty to her, and to you, to see that through. It is not up for negotiation." Her face hardened. "I knew you'd say that," she hissed. "Mark warned me you wouldn't want to let go of the control. He said you see it as your money." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was so absurd, so fundamentally untrue to the very core of my being, that I was speechless. I had sacrificed everything for her, counted every penny, worked every extra hour, all for her. And in her mind, I was a greedy old man clinging to her fortune. I saw then the hand of Eleanor and Mark, masterfully poisoning my daughter against me. They had found my one vulnerability, my deep, unconditional love for my child, and they had twisted it into a weapon. From that day on, I was shut out. Wedding planning happened without me. I wasn't consulted on the venue, the guest list, the flowers. I was informed of the date and time via a formal invitation that arrived in the mail, addressed to Mr. George Miller, as if I were a distant colleague. The pain was a constant, dull ache, but I held on to a sliver of hope. I thought that on her wedding day, standing there in the church, she would see me, and the fog of their influence would lift. She would remember the man who taught her to ride a bike, the man who held her when she cried. She would remember that I was her dad. I bought a new suit. I wrote a heartfelt speech on a small note card, a message of love and hope for her future. I picked out the silver locket, a replica of one Sarah used to wear. I walked into that church with a heart full of love, ready to forgive everything, ready to embrace my daughter and celebrate her new life. And she looked at me with the eyes of a stranger and told me to get out. The days that followed were a blur of hollow emptiness. The house was too quiet. The silence was a constant reminder of my failure. Where had I gone wrong? How could the bond we shared, a bond forged over 2 decades of shared laughter and tears, be so easily broken? For a week, I did nothing. I sat in my armchair, the silver locket on the table beside me, and I grieved. I grieved for the daughter I had lost, for the future I had envisioned, for the family that was now just me. My brother, Robert, a lawyer in the city, called every day. "George, you can't let them do this," he'd say, his voice a mixture of anger and concern. "There's something wrong here. This isn't Lily." I knew he was right, but the pain was paralyzing. Then, on the 8th day, the grief began to recede, replaced by that cold, hard ember of determination I'd felt on the church steps. It was time to stop being a victim. I had spent my life working with numbers. Numbers don't lie. Numbers tell stories. And I had a feeling that Mark and Eleanor's story was a work of fiction. I turned on my old desktop computer, the one I used for my freelance work. My fingers, which had felt so clumsy and useless for a week, flew across the keyboard. I was no longer just a heartbroken father. I was a forensic accountant, and I was opening a case. My first stop was simple curiosity. I ran a basic public records search on Mark and his mother. I started with property records. Eleanor's Grand Country Club home, the one she boasted about constantly, it was mortgaged to the hilt with 2 liens against it from private lenders. A bad sign. High-risk debt. The kind you take on when traditional banks won't touch you. Next, I looked for business filings. Mark was listed as the CEO of Vanguard Investment Group. It sounded impressive, but a deeper dive revealed it was nothing more than an LLC registered to a P.O. box with no physical office, no employees listed, and a history of being dissolved and re-registered under slightly different names every few years. A classic shell game. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't just arrogance. This was deliberate deception. Robert, using his access to legal databases, looked for any litigation. And he found it. A string of lawsuits against Mark and his previous companies. Disgruntled investors, unpaid vendors, accusations of fraud. All of them had been settled out of court, silenced with non-disclosure agreements. They were professional predators, leaving a trail of financial ruin in their wake, always managing to slip away before it stuck. The picture was becoming clearer. They weren't wealthy. They were performers, playing the part of the rich to lure in their next mark. And my daughter, with her mother's trust fund on the horizon, was the perfect target. The real question was, how did they turn her against me so completely? It had to be a lie. A big one. Something so monstrous it would sever the deepest of bonds. I thought back to every conversation, every poisoned barb. He said, "You see it as your money." They had twisted my protection of the trust into greed, my prudence into control. I needed proof. I remembered a few months back, Lily had come to me with a stack of papers from Mark's financial advisor. She'd said it was just a formality. Some paperwork to integrate her future assets into their family portfolio for estate planning purposes. She was in a rush, smiling and charming, and I, wanting to believe things were getting better, had signed where she pointed. I hadn't read them as closely as I should have. A foolish, trusting mistake. I had trusted my daughter. I had a copy of everything I signed, of course. I was meticulous about my records. I pulled the file from my cabinet, my hands trembling slightly. I spread the documents out on my dining room table and began to read. Took me 3 hours to untangle the dense legalese, but when I was done, I felt sick to my stomach. I hadn't signed a simple consent form. Buried in the fine print was a durable power of attorney, granting Mark sweeping control over Lily's financial affairs, effective immediately. And another document even more insidious. A formal petition to the court, co-signed by Lily, to have me removed as the executor of Sarah's trust. The petition was filled with baseless accusations. It painted me as a financially incompetent and potentially senile old man who was mismanaging his daughter's inheritance for his own selfish benefit. It claimed I was unstable and prone to irrational decisions, citing my refusal to cooperate with their superior financial planning. They had used my love and trust to trick me into signing my own condemnation. They had taken my daughter's signature on this document and used it as the foundation of their lie. They told her it was one thing while using it for another. This was the weapon they used. They would have shown her my signature on this petition to remove myself and told her, "See, even he knows he's not capable. But now he's trying to go back on his word. He's trying to keep your money from you." The sheer, calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. They had orchestrated the entire wedding confrontation. They needed a public spectacle. They needed witnesses to see Lily rejecting me, to build their case that I was an unwelcome, destabilizing presence in her life. It was all a performance for the benefit of a future court date. My heart ached for Lily. She wasn't a monster. She was a pawn in a horribly cruel game, manipulated by masters of the craft. She had been fed a steady diet of lies and paranoia until she couldn't see the truth. The love for her, which had been buried under my own pain, surged back with a fierce, protective intensity. My objective was no longer just about vindication. It was about rescue. I spent the next 2 weeks in a frenzy of activity. I gathered every piece of evidence. The mortgage documents, the shell company filings, the court records from Mark's past lawsuits. I created a timeline, cross-referencing their actions with the changes in Lily's behavior. I hired a private investigator, an old friend of Robert's, to do a deep background check on Eleanor. It turned out her old money came from a divorce settlement 25 years ago, and she had spent her way through it, maintaining the illusion of wealth through a mountain of debt. I compiled everything into a single, undeniable dossier, a portfolio of their lies, a testament to their greed. When it was complete, I knew what I had to do. A direct confrontation was the only way. I couldn't just send it to Lily. She was too far under their spell. She would see it as another one of my tricks. I needed to detonate this bomb in a way that she couldn't ignore, in a way that would force her to see the truth with her own eyes. I found out through a mutual family friend that, to appease relatives who couldn't attend the first wedding, Eleanor was hosting an intimate post-wedding dinner at an exclusive restaurant. It was the perfect stage. I called the restaurant, my voice calm and steady, and made a reservation for a table for one, right next to theirs. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes after they did. I saw them through the large glass window, seated at a prime table in the corner. Lily, Mark, and Eleanor. They were laughing, sipping champagne, looking for all the world like a happy, successful family. My Lily looked beautiful, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a practiced, brittle thing. I took a deep breath, clutching the leather-bound dossier I had prepared. I straightened my tie, walked in, and approached their table. The hostess tried to intercept me, but I just smiled and said, "It's all right." I'm with them. 3 sets of eyes snapped up to look at me. Eleanor's face tightened into a mask of pure indignation. Mark's smug smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of alarm. And Lily, her face was a storm of emotions. Shock, anger, and beneath it all, a flicker of something else. Guilt. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I believe you were told you are not welcome." "I'm not here for the party," I said. my voice quiet but carrying in the hushed atmosphere of the restaurant. I pulled up an empty chair from a nearby table and sat down, placing the dossier squarely in the middle of their table. "I'm here for a board meeting," Mark scoffed, recovering his composure. "Dad," Lily said, her voice trembling with anger. "You need to leave. Now. You're embarrassing me." "Am I, Lily?" I asked, my gaze locked on hers. "Or am I embarrassing them?" I opened the dossier. The first page was a large, color printout of the property record for Eleanor's home, showing the 2 liens and the massive amount of debt owed. I slid it in front of her. "Eleanor, you've done a marvelous job of keeping up appearances. But old money doesn't typically rely on high-interest private loans to pay for the country club membership, does it?" Eleanor's face went white. She snatched the paper as if it were on fire. "This is an outrage. Slander." Mark put a hand on her arm. "George, I don't know what kind of pathetic game you're playing, but you're making a fool of yourself. Am I?" I flipped to the next section, a detailed flowchart I had drawn up, showing the history of Mark's shell companies. Vanguard Investment Group, Apex Financial, Sterling Holdings, all connected, all leading back to him, all with a trail of lawsuits and settlements. "This is your business history, Mark. Quite a lot of moving parts for a company with no office and no employees. It's almost as if its only purpose is to create the illusion of success." Mark's face was now a thundercloud. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, I think I do," I said calmly. I turned to the final and most important section. I pulled out the power of attorney and the court petition I had been tricked into signing. I placed them in front of Lily. Her eyes scanned the documents, a frown of confusion on her face. "I've seen these," she said defensively. "It was for estate planning, was it, Lily?" I asked gently. "Read the title of this document. Out loud. Please." She hesitated, her eyes darting from the page to Mark, then back again. Her voice was a small whisper. "Petition to remove executor." I nodded. "And whose signature is that at the bottom, next to mine?" She stared at her own flowing signature. The color drained from her face as the implication of what she was seeing began to dawn on her. "They told you this was to help manage your finances, didn't they?" I continued, my voice soft but relentless. "They told you it was a formality. But what it really is, Lily, is a legal weapon. A document designed to strip me of my ability to protect you. They had you sign a petition filled with lies about me, that I'm incompetent, unstable, senile. They plan to use this in court to seize control of your mother's legacy." I looked directly at Mark. "You needed a reason. You needed to prove to a judge that Lily and I were estranged, that she wanted me out of her life. That's why you orchestrated that scene at the wedding. You coached her, filled her head with poison, and turned her own wedding into a piece of theater for your legal strategy. You didn't marry a woman. You targeted an heiress." The table was silent. The only sound was the distant clinking of cutlery from other diners. Lily was staring at the documents, her whole body trembling. She looked up, her eyes wide with horror, not at me, but at Mark. "Mark," she whispered, "is this true?" Mark's mask of charm finally shattered. His face twisted into a snarl of pure fury. "He's a manipulative old fool, Lily. He's twisting everything. You know he's been trying to keep your money from you." "My money," I interjected, my voice rising for the first time. "This money I've been keeping from her? Let's talk about that." I pulled out the final set of papers. My own meticulously kept accounting ledgers for the trust, showing every penny invested, every dividend earned, every dollar spent on her education, all accounted for over 20 years. And next to it, I placed Mark's credit report, which the private investigator had obtained. It was a sea of red. Maxed out credit cards, defaulted loans, a car repossessed. "This is what a protector of money looks like," I said, pointing to my ledgers. "And this," I said, tapping Mark's report, "is what a predator looks like. He doesn't want to manage your money, Lily. He wants to consume it. He's drowning in debt, and you were his lifeboat." The explosion came, as I knew it would. Mark lunged across the table, grabbing for the papers. "You have no right." he roared, his voice drawing stares from across the restaurant. But I was faster. I swept the documents into my lap. He stood up, his chair clattering to the floor. She's my wife. Her money is my money, he bellowed, his face flushed and ugly. In that one greedy, entitled outburst, he had confirmed everything. He had shown his true face. Lily let out a small, broken sob. It was the sound of a heart breaking, of a world falling apart. She stared at the man she had married, this stranger with a monster's face, and the fog of his influence finally, violently, evaporated. She saw the truth. She saw him for what he was. Eleanor was already on her feet, pulling at Mark's arm, trying to drag him away, muttering about lawsuits and defamation. But the damage was done. The truth was out, laid bare on a restaurant table for all to see. I stood up, my work finished. I looked at my daughter, my poor, broken daughter, her face streaked with tears of disillusionment. The anger was gone from her eyes, replaced by a profound, bottomless well of pain and regret. I didn't say, "I told you so," I didn't need to. I just looked at her, and my eyes conveyed all the love and sorrow I felt. I turned to leave them in the wreckage they had created. As I walked away, I heard a small, choked voice behind me. "Dad." I stopped but didn't turn around. Couldn't. The emotions were too raw. I just paused for a moment, letting her know I had heard her. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reconciliation. Not yet. The road back from a betrayal like that is long and difficult. But it was a start. It was a single word, spoken in her true voice, cutting through the lies. It was the sound of my daughter coming home. The aftermath was messy as expected. The marriage was annulled within a month, with Mark and Eleanor fighting every step of the way until Robert threatened them with a fraud lawsuit that would have exposed them completely. They vanished after that, likely moving on to find their next victim. Lily moved back into her old room in my house. The first few weeks were painfully quiet. We moved around each other like ghosts, the space between us filled with unspoken words and shame. She was fragile, working through the trauma of the manipulation and the humiliation of her own choices. I gave her space, letting her heal at her own pace. I didn't push. I just made her tea in the morning and ensured there was dinner on the table at night. Small acts of fatherhood that felt like the only language we had left. One evening, about a month later, I found her in the living room, holding the silver locket I had tried to give her at the wedding. She was crying silently. I sat down beside her, and for a long time we just sat in the quiet comfort of shared space. "He told me you were trying to control me," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. "He said you didn't think I was smart enough to handle my own life. He said you resented him for giving me things you couldn't. Every time you tried to warn me, it just sounded like he was right." I just nodded, listening. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she sobbed, turning to me, her face a mess of tears and regret. "I'm so sorry." I wrapped my arms around her, holding my daughter for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Her body shook with sobs against my chest. "I know, sweetie," I whispered into her hair. "I know. I've got you. You're home now. We have a long way to go. But the foundation of our love, buried for a time under the rubble of lies, is still there, stronger than I knew." So what's the lesson in all of this? It's that sometimes the people who claim to be giving you the world are really just trying to take yours. And true strength isn't about how loud you can shout, but about how long you can persevere for the truth, especially for the ones you love. If my story resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And tell me your own stories of overcoming betrayal in the comments below. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories about life, love, and the fight for what's right.